And you said that comes from, right, that comes from the feeling side of the helix versus the blocks of aspirations, what you want to be, these types of things that all kind of add up into a reflection of your DNA, right?
Yes, in a way, we are already limited by building blocks, DNA, which can be expressed in different ways, but it's still the layout and the form, the human form is there from the beginning. How that human form then at the end of the day is expressed, that of course depends on the environmental stimuli. And that is why probably now this was very hot this week. Should we or should we not allow ChatGPT to just go its course as developers want, or should we stop it for a while and say, okay, but what are the consequences of this? We're asking far too little about the consequences of our actions, our decisions, and our choices over generations. We are intergenerational thinkers, most of us, while some traditions there are transgenerational thinkers.
Hey friends, you're tuned in to the Learn or Be Learned podcast, a show where wisdom meets curiosity in order to discover the human experience. I'm your host, Shiva D, and remember, you either learn from or you're learned from. Now, let's get back to the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to another awesome episode. Today we have an interesting guest. His name is Tom Meyers, and he is from Belgium, and he's here to share some really cool topics, but I don't want to spoil it just yet. Tom, I'm so glad you're here. Glad to have you. Would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself for the audience?
Thank you very much for having me. Shiva, is really an honor to be asked and to share some, what you can learn or what I can learn, from our
Right.
conversations, because at the end of the day, it's always a two-way street. We give and we receive at the same time. So, I am Tom. Some people call me Tom, the health navigator. I'm an osteopath, body-centered stress coach, and the author of Futurize Yourself, Design Your Life on Purpose, and recently published The Futures Effect, Change Your Story, Change Your Future. Both books are, let's say the first one is a bit more autobiographical, because I wasn't always an osteopath. I actually have a very, a life with many ups and downs, suicidal thoughts, business failing. Actually, a first degree was being a chef, nothing to do with osteopathy or manual therapy, and thinking about the future that was far from my bed. And I never, ever, when I was younger, would think about that I would ever write a book about it, or even be asked on podcasts. Well, that didn't even exist at the time, because I'm born in 1970, so that's a long time ago. And I'm trying to be the best person I can become, and through that, helping people also to flourish and thrive in this fast changing world that has many people on the edge of anxiety, if not in anxiety. And so we have to come up with new models and new paradigms to build our lives around, so we can keep the stability through the changing times. Because it's very important today that we find a central core on which we can build and flourish and thrive And that is possible if I look at my own journey for the last 23 years, and through going, well, let's say going through the motions and having to myself, having thought about all of the things that were going to change and changing, and finding a core for myself. I say, if I can do it, then I'm sure other people can maybe benefit from that. And then it's my task to share that and then see what resonates with people. And not everybody is a teacher, but or a communicator, and I'm graced with that as well. I had to develop it. It was not something that came
Mm-hmm.
naturally. So I'm here today to do that, share, communicate, and somewhere have people think about things they might not have thought about before.
Right. So you mentioned the idea of understanding your future. Does that partially, if not start off with understanding your past? Do you look at that? Or is to understand your future, do you need to understand your past? What is your thoughts?
I think the past is a great teacher, and
Mm,
we have to look back, right? And in my own story, I had to look back and take a new perspective on my past. And the past was, as I said before, not always easy. And I consider myself to be good for nothing based on what other people thought about me. Some people,
mm-hmm,
close to me, he is never going to make it. You can't be proud of him. He's. And then with my business failing, once when I was 29, I actually proved to myself so they were right. And then, of course, then that's a hard or a big bag to carry on your back. And of course, I needed to
right.
shed that bag or to at least get a new perspective on that. So yes, sometimes we need to go into the past. I think the most important thing is what we need to do is find what drives us. And
Mm,
the answers can be found in analyzing the past and the present. And so, sure, I think the basics you need to get first before you can start thinking about scenarios of the future. And the future doesn't exist and can go in many different directions. It's for you to find and envisage basically scenarios of what could the future look like. Is the probable, the plausible, the preferable, and to start thinking from, okay, if this, then that. And for
mm-hmm,
that, yeah, you need to base that on something, and that basis is your experience, and also the way you look at or the way you experience the past can make that projection very difficult. If you're good for nothing and you're going to project that to the future in scenarios, then every single future is going to be, I'm good for nothing. Or you can say, I was good for nothing, but maybe I can become good at something. And what are those somethings that I can then project into the future? And then start creating scenarios from which you can come back to the present and say, how am I going to make that future possible? Because if it's something outside of what you've already been doing, for me, like therapy, I was, the shop that I had, I was selling charcuterie, cheese, and wine. And that was failing. And then at one stage, I found through help, and I didn't do this on my own, I found that there was a therapist in me. So when I projected a future scenario with me as a therapist, right, I wake up and I'm a therapist. Okay, then from that moment onwards, it doesn't say which therapy, and it doesn't
mm-hmm,
say is that a manual therapy? Is that coaching therapy? Is that a doctor? No, and then you have to come back to the present and see from okay, what triggers me, or in what can I be a therapist, or some other elements that come into your life that suddenly pull you forward and actually show you
Right.
the way. But if you don't know where you're going, you can also not be shown the way. When you don't know where you're going, you can't also make the right decision if somebody gives you an opportunity, because that opportunity is that good or bad. If you don't know where you're going, then you cannot really make
Right.
that decision. So that's why it's so absolutely great to have future scenarios. And it's the same as having a holiday scenario. Yeah, like, oh, where shall we go on holiday next year? And then, oh, let's say maybe it is Dallas, or
Mm-hmm.
or maybe I decide to go to the other side. Maybe I can go to India, or maybe I can go just to France, which is a bit closer. And then say, what would be the ideal scenario, the preferable one that will fulfill that what I want to experience during that holiday.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, that what I want to experience is going to narrow which one of the three that I'm going to choose as the preferable one. And then from that moment onwards, I say, I'm going to make a choice. And then I'm going to say from, okay, so it is France. And then it's unwavering France. And then how I'm going to get there. And what would I like to do there? And then you see, futures thinking about your personal life is not any different than thinking
Mm-hmm.
about your next holiday. The only thing it's outside of what you think is not possible. So it's about between 5 and 10 years from today. Because of course, if you need to do some studies like I had to do, osteopathy studies takes 5 years. Now, if you're going to say, I'm going to be an osteopath in 3, then you've already limited yourself because that's not possible. So you need to put it far enough also that it doesn't stress you.
Right. Right. I love this topic because the last guest I had that we recorded, we talked more about the idea of past and why certain people will go towards substances or some sort of escapism to and avoid confronting their past. And now this conversation is more so, let's say you've kind of confronted the past and figured some things out. Now, how can you project that to the future self of what you want to be or ought to be? But I want to ask you, because this comes to mind, is what about the idea of, analysis paralysis? It's you have so many options and you're not really sure which one to commit to and do, right? Let's say, like you said, right? I could go to France, I could go to India. It's so many options. Which one am I, which one do I really want to do? And that in itself can cause the anxiety from taking that first step, right? So what advice do you give for that scenario?
Yes. And it's too right at the moment as well. There is too much choice. Our generation has too much choice, and then you get also the paralysis of choice. And not choosing is also a choice, right? Um,
Right.
um, to narrow it down, to base it on what I've called in my new book. And it's like I write and then suddenly I get insights and I then suddenly start to analyze these insights and then something completely different than I was initially thinking about, what the book should entail. Some new stuff comes up, which elevates it. And this was that, and basically my life has been based and my future scenarios have been based on a DNA of the future. And DNA stands for does not alter. So I I actually based my future image of myself on those things that do not change. And I will explain that because it's like a DNA structure, the helix. It's based on two strands and bonds. So you have the helix, you have these outsides, the spirals, and then these spirals gets connected with bonds. And one side of the spiral is how do I want to feel? And that seems like a really stupid question, but if I ask that to my patients, how do you want to feel? A lot of the times I get a blank stare back. And it's like, what is he asking me? It seems too obvious. And then if they
Yeah.
think about it in a moment, then they see from, I've actually never thought about that. And then the first reaction you get is, I don't want to feel this. And I said from, but that is not what I'm asking. I said from, how do you want to feel? Or what do you want to feel? And I narrowed it down for myself. I want to feel content, fulfilled, and healthy, right?
Yeah. That's what I
And
was gonna
but
say.
look at what you're going to project. Do you really think, Shiva, tell me, do you want to feel that when you're 80?
No.
No, you don't want to feel content, fulfilled, and healthy when you're 80?
At 80?
Yeah, at 80.
When I'm 80,
Yeah,
yes.
of course. Do you think you want to
Yes.
feel it when you're 90?
Of course.
Yeah. Do you think you wanted to feel
Hmm.
it when you were 20 or earlier? When I actually don't know how old you are.
I'm 24.
I'm 20, I'm 52 this year. 53
Hmm.
this year. So I'm sure we all want to feel that, right? So it does not alter with time. So it's stable. The second part is, what are your aspirations? What do you want from life? And again, to bring that back into a sort of concrete things, I want to have a great future or a great life. And great is an acronym. Not only do I want a great future and a great life, but the acronym stands for good, resilient, evolvable, actionable, and transcendent. Who doesn't want a good future and a good life? Who doesn't want to be resilient, meaning adaptable in health and well-being, but also job-wise and environmental-wise? Or who doesn't want to be or doesn't want to evolve as a person? So that means grow and somewhere have that sense that there is a sort of a personal evolution that you're going through. I don't want to be the kid that I was, when I'm 60 or 80. I hope I've grown
Hmm.
and learned a little bit. And I want to do things that are actionable, that are doable. And I want to make sure that at the end of this life that I can exit it saying, I did my best and I'm hope that I left this world a bit more beautiful for me being in it and with meaning and purpose. So I'm a transgenerational thinker. I think about myself, but I also think about the next generation. That as I was a inheritor, of a world, I will leave the world for somebody else. Yeah. So are we
Hmm.
being good ancestors? And there is also a
Right.
book written about it. And then, so these are again the things that I'm sure that at 80 I still want. I still want that great future for myself. And the bonds is my potential. I found out that in me there is the potential to be a therapist, a communicator, a teacher, a researcher, and a traveler. And these are, I found this out not just like that. I had help, I had questions, I had homework to do, which three questions actually got me to discover what was inside of me. But again, once you're born with this, at 80 you still have that. But so this is my DNA, and so what I want to feel, my aspirations, and my potential, and from that I'm going to create my future. Or from that, I created my future and asked others to say, okay, find that first, do the homework, find the building blocks. And then when you're going to project, then of course, the scenarios of the future becomes a little bit more guided and directed and limited, but
Right.
not limited to limit your life, but to limit it to that what actually can bring you flourishing and thriving in your life.
Hmm. So you're saying if someone is stagnant or paralyzed by choice, it's often because they still need to put in some self-reflection work, figure out those building blocks.
You have to find out your building blocks. What
And you
drives
said
you?
that comes from, right, that comes from the feeling side of the helix versus the, the
Aspirations.
blocks of aspirations, what you want to be, these types of things that all kind of add up into a reflection of your DNA, right? Who you ought to be.
Yes. You know,
Mm.
when out of a chicken egg comes a chicken, right? So
Hmm.
out of, conception comes a human. There doesn't come a chicken or a dinosaur. And so in a way, we are already limited uh, by building blocks,
Mm.
DNA, which can
Right,
be expressed in different ways, but it's still the layout and the form, the human form is there from the beginning.
right,
How that human form then at the end of the day is expressed, that of course depends on the environmental stimuli. How you are, the certain stimuli will, make you prone for depression or unhappiness. But if you have a very caring family that supports you and gives you what you need and helps you in your development, then of course, then that person will be expressing itself in a different way.
right.
And you see that with twins, for example, and there's the same and they're put into two different families. At the end, they still look the same, but the way they express themselves and what they're going to do with their lives can be quite different.
Right, right. Due to their environmental
And
changes.
so this is what we need to find. And this is how we are going to have more stability through change, because once we can always fall back upon this DNA of your future structure, something you can hold on to while everything around you changes, because that does not change, that does not alter. And building on that, what does not change is a phrase I read from Jeff Bezos from Amazon, who's built his companies on this. People will keep on reading. That is the stable through change, but we can change the way they read. But they will read.
Mm.
Shopping. People will always go shopping, but we can change the way people shop. And so the expression of shopping is changed. So most of his
Right.
businesses are built upon the same parameters that I just laid the link between these two, seeing my own life, that I've actually done the same thing with the building blocks of trillions of cells and the soul.
So, what is an example that translates, because you mentioned Jeff Bezos' ideas in business and how the essence of what he does is the core doesn't change, but it evolves, right?
Yes.
So, how does that, what's an example maybe in your life or somebody, you helped to kind of give that comparison?
Okay. So when I found out my DNA for the future, which only recently I started to call it this way. I'm a therapist, and my first steps in therapist was kinesiology, which is more based on energy work and muscle testing. And then after a year of various courses, and I even made it quite quickly up to instructor of some of them, because for me, it was like I was home for the first time in my environment, in my body. I was actually doing something there where I was recognized as talented, different than others. Like, you can do this so easily. And did you do it before? No, never. I've just started. And people could not believe that I was doing it for the first time, because it was so self evident the way I did it. And I felt also that. And then so I started to look for more, and that is then how osteopathy came into my life as an option. And so the options were: do I have to become a doctor? Do I have to become a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner or an osteopath? And for me, the path was then, the choice of the future scenarios were then where the preferable one was osteopathy because it was a manual therapy, and I had this kind of manual touch was very important, and not just putting a needle into somebody, for example. And I didn't have the brain necessarily for being a complete medical doctor. And so, but of course, that in the future, when I'm 80, am I still going to be the osteopath? Well, the scenario is that maybe I'm physically not capable to do that anymore. Maybe there isn't another scenario is there is no demand of it anymore because the world has evolved. But I can still imagine myself in a retirement home with, with my octogenarians all together, listening to them, or even be listening to the nurses that come and treat me because, they probably have, a challenging time. They also have, as they do now, and they sometimes just need a listening ear. And they will find me. They've always, people always have found me to to listen to. When even in my shop selling charcuterie and cheese, people were just talking about their problems in life. And I never asked for that. I never elicited it.
Mm-hmm.
And they just did. I was
Right.
the shrink of my mother from the age of 14, which I cannot recommend to anybody. But somewhere, for me, even then, it felt quite natural. It felt not like something that was alien. And so at 80, I probably fall back upon that listening as a therapy. So this is how it evolves, and this is how scenarios are built. And maybe some other form of therapy exists by then that we don't even know and can conceptualize today that I can express at that stage. Who knows? Anyway, there's so much
I'd
evolving.
actually go as right. I was just gonna say, I would go as far to say even to some extent, podcasting could be a sense of therapy, depending on the topics, of course, but for some, because it gives you that sense of closeness to what you're listening to without the anxiety of opening up, right? You get to hear the thoughts of, for example, yourself, and they can internalize it without feeling a sense of embarrassment or need to show face, right? So they can do it behind the scenes. I think that could be a way of therapy evolving.
Exactly. And hosting a podcast can be therapeutic. It's
Mm-hmm.
not only for the listener, right? I find
Mm-hmm.
writing books therapeutic for me because I get insights that I've never had before. Because I'm writing
Mm-hmm.
stories that I'm trying to link that with the world, my world, with the outside worlds, with my experience, professional experience. So I'm mixing all of this. And then suddenly I start to see patterns that I had no idea about before. And I share you a story about this. It's like um, my relationship with my father when I was younger was quite a difficult one. And turns out that the problem, and we had a very short conversation about this, my dad and I. Basically, he was waiting for me to come to him, and I was waiting for him to come to me.
Right.
And yeah,
Miscommunication in a
miscommunication.
way. Yeah.
And then I was writing about this, and then but why was I waiting for him? And it suddenly dawned on me that the first years of my life, I was actually brought up with my grandparents because my parents went to work and it was easier. And my granddad took me everywhere. And it was, Tom, let's do this.
Mm,
Tom, let's go to Antwerp. Tom, let's go into the cellar to do some handiwork. Tom, let's go upstairs, and do some, Lego work. And so my granddad for 3 years took me everywhere. I've never
mm,
had to ask, and my grandmother provided other parts of my life that I never ever had to ask a question. It was always provided before I needed it. So my formative years, my, you know, the person that you put like you're, on top of everything else provided, took me anywhere. I never had to ask a question. And then when I started, when I could live with my mother and father again, when there was again that room because I was a bit older and I could go to the kindergarten and so forth, then of course, I think I was expecting the same thing from my dad. And that was not my grandfather, his father.
Right.
And
Right.
it's only at now at 52 that you have to discover, I know where that now comes from, why I'm always sitting down and waiting, hello, for the world to come to me. And I had to learn over the last 10 years to say, but this is not how the world works. Then you have to go into the world. It's you have to do things. If you want to change, you have to change. You don't wait for change to come to you. If you want a purpose in life, Tom, it doesn't come to you. You have to give your life a purpose.
Hmm.
Hard lessons to learn. And now I know where that comes from. So,
Right. I actually have this similar conversation with a friend all the time about this idea of generational burden and trauma, even passed through, DNA in a way, because, you know, maybe this is true, maybe it's not, but just an example, right? With what you've said is perhaps your dad's dad was busy and didn't have time to help him, but now has time to help his grandkid, which is you, right? And then so then your dad develops the same mentality of, okay, well, I'm going to wait for my son to come to me the same way he waited for his dad to come to him, but it didn't happen, right? So it's like a cycle. It's almost until you see it, you reflect it, and you internalize it. It's like, okay, this is how the world actually operates, and I can maneuver through that.
yeah. And there you bring up a very good point that I'm a bit concerned about is, of course, when the scenario of the future is, or one of them is internalizing technology within the body. So
Mm,
executive decision making technology. Now, so when that is going to make decisions, then of course, what's going to happen with the DNA expression? Is that going to switch off certain DNA sequences that then get passed
right,
on to our offspring that doesn't have the technology inside? And how is that going to impact the development of that child? And for me, not knowing enough about it, I can only see one thing: de-evolution rather than evolution. And I can
right,
see problems not only a generation away, but sometimes 3 generations away, because it doesn't always go further into the next generation, but can take some time to mature. And then 3 generations, you start to get problems, which is a
yeah,
scientific fact that is, that is already happening and being written about. That some things express themselves multiple generations later, that they can trace
right,
back to a certain event and certain catastrophe in the world in a certain area, and then that they see from 3 generations ago, this happened in that region, and all the descendants of that are more prone for depression. It's a
right.
reality. So shouldn't we start thinking about this?
Even like the idea of generational wealth gap could occur, right? As people that are, often making more money are probably using their frontal cortex, making executive decisions constantly, making business ideas or whatever, right, they're into. And that gets passed down while, other people are letting the AIs and all this software do the executive decision making. And then that gets passed down. And then that gap just grows to the point you have certain people are high level thinkers and others have this dormant DNA of generations that never worked, right? So the brain never worked in that regard. So it's like the gap will grow if people aren't using their brains, right?
Indeed, and that is why probably now this was very hot this week. Should we or should we not allow ChatGPT to just go its course as developers want, or should we stop it for a while and say, okay, but what are the consequences of this? And we're asking far too little about the consequences of our actions and of our decisions and our choices over generations. We are intergenerational thinkers, most of us, while
Hmm.
some traditions there are extra, are transgenerational thinkers, of course. And it with stress, and this is, of course, again, to my professional expertise, the more we are stressed, the more we are thinking about today and us as me. And because the stress response is a survival response of oneself and one's closest family, one's children most of the time. But of course, the more stressed we are, the less that we're going to think about the others and about long-term consequences, or are we able to project long-term in the future? While this is exactly what we need to do, because, for example, climate change, it's not something we can wait about, right? It's something we need to
Hmm.
project forward. This is going to happen. So I need, through my decisions, choices, and actions, I still have an influence, even though small, that it seems small steps. Every single step counts. COVID has shown us our personal impact on the world, right? Through very small
Right.
steps, the world has changed, but it has started with a few people with a few very, very small steps that for them was inconsequential, but has changed the world, right? So every day, one of us can wake up and change the world also in a much more flourishing and thriving way.
Hmm.
And are we
And it's
need,
quite scary.
yeah, it
Go ahead.
it is. Sorry, it is scary, and
Hmm.
but we always, and it, all the generations that have gone before us, it's been like this, right? It's not something new. So it's not about being anxious about this. It's always been like that. You always had that power. But now let's use the power of that now that we are conscious about it, now that we're seeing it, now let's use it for something really good, right?
Right. And I think that's really the essence of the podcast in a way, because it's the idea of being consciously aware of what's going around us. That is the human experience, right? Not going subconscious and scrolling through TikTok for 10 hours, which is, quite addictive. These AI algorithms are getting only better and better at understanding what you want to see and keeping you there to see it. And, that just deters from the experience of what it is to be human, to consciously pick ideas of what your future self ought to be, and reflect on your past, and create the future from a conception of an idea, and things like that. I think is would decline if people don't become self-aware of what's going on around them, because just as scary as technology can be as it grows, is it's also quite beautiful. Like right now we're both communicating from different parts of the world, right? So that was almost unimaginable, right, at one point. So it's got a beautiful side and a dark side. And I think I love this quote. It's a to understand life is to understand both extremities and then find balance. And that happens in many aspects of life, right? So even just like this technology aspect is it's inescapable, but if we can find a balance for it, I think it can be a beautiful technology to enhance our lives.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this also this couple of this last week actually about a new word. It's a bit more scientific word, but you have homeostasis to keep the balance in the cell. So very
Mm-hmm.
small, rather rigid kind of changes to keep the balance within the cells or between cells. And then you have allostasis, which is part of the stress response, where to survive, you sometimes need a lot of adrenaline and a lot of cortisol. So, and then it needs to build down so that the flexibility is represented through bigger changes, but to find the balance again. And then I was thinking from what would be next, more into
Mm-hmm.
adaptability for balance. And the
Mm.
word that for me resonated the most was stasis. So EU stasis. And that means EU means good. So EU in Greek is good. So the good balance and the
Right.
good balance, the good stability. And apparently, it also means that kind of point between ebb and flow in water. So that also when you breathe in, point, breathe out. There is like this moment, the equilibrium between these two, where you can go from one into the other. And I thought probably that represents that balance point, right, from where we should return to. Um, because again, words matter. If we have words for it, we can start to conceptualize, more models around it. And we know when, for some people, don't need models, but I need models because it helps me to focus more, right? And
Mm-hmm.
as you were rightfully saying as well, we've been living up till now very much more from our prehistoric kind of reactive mode, and that was very good in a very slow evolving world. But now that the world is evolving faster than we are, right? So there is a conflict between biology and cultural speed of evolution. Then, of course, that older let's wait and see, que sera, sera, does, that is basically become dangerous to us.
Mm-hmm.
So can we
Right.
complement it with what I call evolopsis, which is evolving on purpose, right? I create words because I create words around it and it exists, and then we can again create new models. And so that we say from, okay, this evolopsis, evolving on purpose, is that possible? Can we aid our natural autonomous evolution with a more conscious evolution? And then we can come back to what you also mentioned earlier and say from, okay, but then that will be passed on to, into our DNA, into our offspring, that they will start basing themselves on our already differently triggered DNA, because we are amazing human beings. The things we can do,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
potential that we have not explored yet about ourselves is tremendous. So let's start focusing a little bit with that and start developing that potential, because potential is that what can be evolved or developed over time. Let's delve into some of that and aid the natural evolution with a more conscious evolution to become the light beings that we potentially can be. If you're happy and you have the best day of your life and you're feeling the flow, you feel light, right? You feel lighter.
Right.
When you feel depressed, then you feel heavy. And you can be 70 kilos and heavy or 70 kilos light. A person of 100 kilos and more can be feeling very heavy or very light in that body.
Mm-hmm.
How is that possible to have the experience of lightness while the weight hasn't changed? And that is what I'm talking about. So if you can delve into that potential of that feeling of lightness because of inspiration, because of that kind of aha experience that we have, and get more of that, wouldn't you sign up for it? I do. I've
Mm-hmm.
signed up for it.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, this is why I love the topic of anthropology. One big topic we talk about in anthropology is the different evolutions culturally, right? So we had the agricultural revolution, which was huge for humans. We started becoming sedentary. And then we had the industrial revolution, which was huge because we started using machines to mass produce stuff, even the printing press, right? Books and everything. So then I often talk about how this is the next stage of evolution that is not really talked about yet, but will be in the books, is the technological revolution, which is what we're currently going through, right? This exceptional speed at which we're creating technology just year after year is almost incomprehensible how quickly things are changing. Just like 10 years ago, people were just having Facebook and it was very minimal. You post a picture of what you did and it's very subtle. And now it's like you have, Facebook Live and you can have communities and you can sell things. And just in those span of years, things are evolving so quickly, technology wise. I think the idea of balance, like you're talking about, is so important because this evolution, this revolution that we're going through, is very fast, and it's changing so quickly that if you're not consciously aware of it, it might just suck you in, and you'll just become automatic to the process of, okay, I just finished work, I'll go watch some TV. And then in time, that develops this sense of, anxiety. And it's like, well, what is my purpose? What am I doing? Why do I feel this way? And it's kind of coming back to the idea of what we've talked about is self reflection in order to create that new future for yourself. So, that all being said, this idea comes to mind I want to ask you is, what about for the people that are listening here that, want to make that change but feel kind of stuck? They feel stuck in life. They're in a job they're not particularly interested in, or they're doing things they're not particularly interested in, but their belief system is maybe this is what I have to do to eventually become to do something else later on. Well, what advice would you give for people
I
like that?
think the first step after realizing that something needs to be done is getting help. You are not alone.
Mm,
And some things is just easier. Let's know, easier is the wrong word because it's never easy, but sometimes we need that outside perspective to get us out of the bulb and the limitations that we've set ourselves. If I didn't have had the help from somebody else, I would never be even imagine to think about my potential. I did not know how to find my potential. I didn't even know that you could find potentially within yourself. I couldn't even think about projecting my potential into the future. All of these things, they were not on my radar. I did not know that was possible until I was told it was possible. It's not that I thought it was impossible. I just had never thought about it. And that is, um, for most people, is what we need. It's like that kind of a guidance. And it doesn't mean um, coaching eternally. My change was 3 sessions of 2 hours, and that was all that I needed to make a difference.
was there resistance to starting
Of
or
course.
going to get help?
Oh, when I received a little piece of paper with a number and a name from my local pharmacist who came in my shop and he said, "From Tom, here is a name and here's a number. She will help you." I thought she was bonkers. I
Mm-hmm.
really thought that's for desperate people, and I'm not desperate. And I also had an image
Mm-hmm.
of my mother, who's always been ill, always had some mental health problems, was followed up by a psychologist, psychiatrist. Sometimes my mom was taken up in care for a month when I was, still, I was not even a teenager at that time. And this was my example of help, right? And I saw my mother being ill and not very, very well at all. I was not my mother. I didn't feel ill at all.
Mm.
And of course, then I rejected that because that was for desperate people like my mom who were sick. I was not sick.
Right.
But if you could think
Right.
about it, if I think about it now, in a way, you might not have seen it on my face, but in my words, in what I was saying, and how I was standing in life, I was not in balance, and I had
Mm.
no idea how to get myself out of that. And for some people, it might be an inspirational book that just pulls them out of that because the book gives them the let's say the new perspective. But of course, you have a new perspective, and if it's a book, then you have to have a lot of courage to, of course, put that knowledge into action. And then there is a word that I'm looking for, but I can't think about it. Then, you know, for me, when I went to see that coach, Elena, I had a sort of responsibility towards her. It's another word. I can't think of it. I'm not an English speaker, but so sometimes I struggle. Although my English is quite well, I know,
Oh
because
yeah.
I've lived in England for many years. But um, there is this kind of I felt an obligation towards her to do my homework, right?
Mm.
And so because when you have a coach, then it's not only about you anymore. It's about you, but you have that other person that you say from, okay, she will slap me if I don't do my homework. That was my thought. I was quite intimidated by her. And so it's also good to have a coach that is not so soft with you, that has a stronger hand and that doesn't just say, oh, sorry, that you've been through that. Oh, my dear, that is, oh, and then you say, oh,
Yeah.
thank you for understanding me. I didn't get that at all. It was like, boom, slap Tom here and boom, slap. Why did you do this? Why did you thought that? That's, it's like really completely
Yeah.
bonkers. So I had somebody who suited me quite well because I needed the kick on the backside.
Yeah.
And I needed to be told, Tom, come on, think about it, right? And that helped me to evolve. So that question you're asking is really good, Tom. What do you do? And it's difficult to answer because we're all very different and our problems are very different. But I think the first thing to do is to recognize it and then to say, from me, let's get some help and see where that gets me. And there are a lot of options today who are also affordable. I think therapy has been democratized. Can one say that? There are the $10,000 coaches for an hour, but there are also ones that are free. They are in exchange of something, or they cost you just that little bit that is stretching you a little bit, but that also encourages and motivates you to get the most out of it. And at the end of the day, they're just holding a mirror in front of you. But at the end of the day, you need to do the work, right?
Right.
Don't ask them to do the work for you, which many people do, but that's not what therapy is all about. It's about you doing the work. It's just like a pill, that it can do a little bit, but you need to do the work, right? It's not solving all your problems, the pill. No, it will just come back when the pill is worn out.
Yeah. That's very interesting because, like you said, it's oftentimes we'll easily let ourselves down, but if someone else is involved, we almost feel a social obligation to perform or to not let other people down, which it's almost like you prioritize others over yourself, perhaps for even maybe sometimes a selfish reason, which is to not look bad, right? So
Yes,
it's so right. So it's like a sense of accountability
that's
almost,
the word I
I'd
was
say.
looking for. Accountability. Yes, it gives you
Mm-hmm.
that accountability to somebody else. And if you have a book that can be great inspiration, but you're still accountable to yourself, which can be a problem for some people. But that's when you have that accountability towards somebody else. Then it pushes you sometimes just that little bit further and better and faster. But for example, a book, what I found as well, a book can be the great inspiration to get help. And that is what I also found that sometimes just before going to the therapist, I had read a book about Edgar Casey and I read about the Celestine prophecy. And these were books that were revelatory. They revelatory but that was just it. They were the revelation, but that's when I started talking with the therapist. These revelations got meaning and got strength and actually elevated that moment with the therapist to the next level for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea of help, but you know, I guess being completely honest, for me, it's almost a sense of ego, of kind of what you were saying, right? The resistance of not going to get help in the first place. Or I guess also a couple of past previous experiences that weren't very fruitful. You know, how do you find someone that's a right fit? Is it just trial and error? You just keep going to a few different people?
Yeah. I think I was lucky. The
Hmm.
first one hit home. But
Yeah,
in therapy, it can be indeed, but these days you can read about their profiles. You can read about some
no,
comments
that's
that they
true.
make. They always have some kind of who am I, and you can ask also a little bit about their life philosophy with the conversation. Can I have a conversation with you? I would I'd like to have a conversation before I start, considering, having some therapy sessions with you so that to see that we are aligned with each other, with each other's philosophies or with, where you can take me. So yeah, sometimes it takes a few trials, but these days, I think people want to help you, or just from a business economical point of view, they want uh, want to have you as a client, and then you can also be
Hmm.
maybe a little bit more asking from them beforehand before you start. And if
Hmm.
somebody, I have this opportunity that people say from, you know, you can have a 15-minute call with me, just ask me questions, right? It's completely for free, but I have that on my website and say, just call me for 15 minutes. We plan it into the agenda. How can I help you? And then you can hear from what I'm saying or give us answers to your questions to see from, hey, this is an interesting match. Let's see how it goes from there.
Right. Also, I think maybe the idea of finding someone who's a little bit more relatable, right? If you're a guy, maybe look for a male therapist, or if you're Indian, look for an Indian therapist. Maybe oftentimes, not saying 100%, but maybe they're oftentimes probably a little bit more relatable under what you've gone through.
Yeah, also cultural values, right? If you have
Hmm.
somebody that when you have your own culture and their culture is very different than yours, then of course they might not
Right. The
understand you.
perspective.
I go in
Hmm.
now, I get asked to teach in India my reset approach, my osteopathic and manual therapy approach. And one of the first things I did was ask some of my Indian connections on LinkedIn, say from
Hmm.
how do I teach Indians? Do I do it the same way as I would do here in Belgium, or is there any other way? Luckily, it was the same, and I can be myself. But now I'm also experiencing how Indian culture is very different, right? There are
Hmm.
other things that surprise me and that I need to adapt towards. And okay, so there are different. So I can understand that also an Indian therapist, an Indian person going to a very classical European therapist might not be the right choice because we
Hmm.
see the world in a very different way. And so,
Right.
yeah, a very valid point, Shiva, that is really interesting that you have to
Hmm.
find somebody that fits your cult, let's call it culture as it's not about
Yeah.
nationality. It's also from many aspects of now with the question of gender issues, that you find somebody that
Yeah.
understands that about you,
Right. So mainly more just someone that fits your perspective.
but who is not lenient on you, right? It's not somebody that
Mm,
should be too the same.
yeah, that's true. Right. It's a balance like everything
Yeah,
else.
Stasis comes back.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I loved this conversation. I think these are just some fascinating topics. And Tom, I want to ask you one last question. This show is called Learn or Be Learned. So I often ask my guests at the end of the show, what is something, one life lesson that either you learned from others or you want others to learn from your life that you want to share with the audience?
I think
A
that
big
I
takeaway.
think that one takeaway from personal and professional life, right? I'm a manual therapist, and the phrase is mind your body before your body reminds you. The body is that vehicle of your soul that makes all your dreams, or is part in all that you're going to do from whenever it was to whenever where you're going. The body is the one thing that also does not alter. The body is always going to be there. It's going to get different, expressed differently, with age and so forth. But the importance of taking care of the body is so valuable because, of course, a good body, then you will also experience things in a certain way. When you don't take care of your body, then of course everything you're going to do with that body is going to be colored with that. So, and mind your body before your body reminds you. It's just good advice, and it's also futures thinking. It's about don't wait till it's too late. It's about
Yeah.
allowing the body now definitely to allow it to more relax, recuperate, and regenerate because the demands on it have exponentially increased, and the stress response is being activated all the time. It's an autonomous system, so it has a mind on its own, and it's reactive. So autonomous means it's doing that by itself, while relaxation and taking time to relax, it doesn't come naturally. It's something you need to do. So there is a combination of letting the body do the work that needs to be combined with a responsibility. As we said before, there is autonomous evolution that needs to be combined with evolopsis or evolving on purpose. This is the same issue here, that the body's you don't have to think about your heartbeat. You don't have to think about your blood pressure and about your digestion. So all of this is done automatically. But for that, there is a responsibility to allow it to, have the conditions in where it can do that optimally. And that's where the phrase comes, mind your body before your body reminds
I love that because I often talk about the gut brain hypothesis. There's a connection between your brain and your gut. And over time, through biological evolution, our guts got smaller and our brains got bigger, which is almost in itself explains that there's an energy exchange, right? There is a connection there. And I think it's health and your body is often very neglected. And like you said, and unfortunately, many people have to be reminded in unfortunate ways, right? So it's like the body's a vessel for the mind. And if you want to truly project, the next version of yourself, your ideas, your goals, your body has to come first. What's the point if your vessel is not performing optimally, right? It's one of the basic needs of survival is it'll bring you back down mentally to the survival state. So it's incredibly important to take care of your health and your body in order to reach that next stage, I think.
you. Yeah. Good summary. Thank you, Shiva.
Well, thank you, Tom, for being here. This was an awesome
Thank you
conversation. I
very
really
much.
appreciate it.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much, Shiva. It's really, it's flowed again, right?
Yeah, right.
It's like we just started and it's already an hour has gone
Over
by.
an
Oh my
hour,
God.
right? Yeah.
Thank you.